How many days does it take to lock down the Grove? Can disarmed enemies actually re-equip their weapons? And do you really need featherfall to survive a dive into the Underdark? In this video, we answer all these questions and more. First, let's tackle the myth that players get punished for resting too many days and then they are locked out of the Druid's Grove. When trying to search wikis, YouTube, and even Google for the answer, I came across probably 50 different results, including 2, 5, 10, 15, or even 20 long rests. So in order to find out the answer, I loaded up a new game, completed the tutorial, and I got resting. 20 long rests later, I entered the Grove. To find out, it didn't matter. But maybe it only matters after this point, or when talking to specific people inside. So I became a social butterfly and hibernated for 3 more weeks, to find out that once again, nothing has changed. The next idea I had was that it might require you to visit a certain area in the act or require a certain level. So I continued this method of testing, completing the quests and fights in an area and then resting 20 times. First, I started in the village, then the goblin camp, then the Underdark, and then Grimforge, completing every quest and encounter that I could possibly find, outside of killing the goblins leaders or the people in the Grove. And after 200 days of long resting, nothing happened, as you can see by the number of autosaves I have. So, unless I had some weird bug blocking my game, I think it's safe to say that long resting cannot complete the Rite of Thorns and close off the Grove. So what exactly can? Further research online led me to find that killing Helsin or Zevlor should be the trigger, which I did, and once again nothing happened. The next advice that I read was to kill every single tiefling in the Grove. So a few war crimes later, and the quest popped up and it said that the tieflings have decided to leave, finally triggering the Grove's closure. With a bit of repeated testing, I found that killing Zevlor and about 10 other tieflings will be the trigger to advance this quest and close off the Grove. So that's one trigger found. Next, I'd read that killing Korga would immediately trigger the ritual, so I used a new exploit that I recently discovered where we stuff Gale's corpse into a box while in turn-based mode and move it around until she dies from the necrotic aura, which doesn't actually cause anyone to blame me for her death or initiate combat, and gives us all the experience. Then, to what should be no one's surprise at this point, the internet was wrong once more. Korga's death does not trigger a lockdown. Instead, you need to actually attack a druid, touch the idol, ignore them at the entrance of the Grove, or annoy them in some other way, to get this cutscene to trigger, which shows that the druids are attacking the tieflings. Doing this will cause the Grove to go into lockdown immediately upon leaving the area. But the final trigger, and probably the one that started this whole myth, is that by entering the mountain pass, or Act 2, a message will pop up on the screen with a dialogue box explaining that leaving the area will advance your quests, which many people ignore like it's a text message from their crazy ex-girlfriend. And this actually prompts a forced long rest. After this long rest completes, your quest will pop up to say that the tieflings have decided to leave the Grove. And if you try to return, you'll find that the entrance to the Grove is now sealed off. So, unless somebody else knows something that I don't, I'm pretty confident in saying that the amount of long rests that you take does not affect the Grove's closure. And Larian themselves even hinted at this in an interview with IGN, meaning this one is busted. The second myth being looked at today is that the Disguise Self spell can stop guards from searching for you when pickpocketing or stealing. This is a myth that I found posted on other people's YouTube guides, and I had several comments on my own videos asking me to confirm if it actually works. That casting Disguise Self, pickpocketing, and then shifting back out makes it impossible for you to be caught. Lucky for me, these are pretty easy to test, so they shouldn't be wrong, right? With just 20 seconds of testing, we can pickpocket this vendor, drop our disguise, and wait to see what happens. And of course, we're caught in the act. But maybe the person who posted this was just talking about stealing random items in the area. So with 10 more seconds of testing, we can find that that too does not work. While the myth is a cool idea on paper, it just doesn't seem to work. Part 2 of this myth comes from a tip on a certain controversial wiki site. The Disguise Self prevents you from being caught when using Friends in Baldur's Gate 3. Just in case you weren't aware, when you're using Friends on higher difficulties, there's a chance for it to fail, and then the guards will accuse you of casting a forbidden spell. But with just another 15 seconds of testing, we find that this too does not appear to be accurate, as once again we're caught in the act. My guess is whoever was testing this was not playing on the Tactician difficulty, which may have been why they were never caught. There is actually one crime that Disguise Self does prevent you from being caught in, and that's when you escape from jail. Normally when you're escaping, you get the fugitive debuff on you and guards will arrest you on the spot. But if you're disguised, then they don't care. However, I didn't see anybody mention this one in any YouTube guides. And as far as being caught when pickpocketing, stealing, or using the Friend spell, well, in my testing, in each of these cases, it appeared to be false. Meaning this one too is busted. The next myth being looked at today is that you must have featherfall to survive jumping into the Underdark. In case you're unaware, in Act 1 near the spider boss, you can jump into this chasm here for a shortcut directly into the Underdark. And basically every single online post I could find mentioned that you require featherfall in order to not die when doing this. So I did a bit of research into the D&D 5e rules that Baldur's Gate 3 is based on, and I found that the maximum possible fall damage is supposed to be capped at 120. So it should be impossible to die this way as long as you have more than 120 health. which is normally quite difficult to achieve in Act 1, but they recently buffed the Explorer difficulty to double your health, so by changing the difficulty, we can set our level 5 Barbarian's health pool to 125. And moving our mouse with the jump ability selected into the chasm shows that we should take 122 damage instead of death like it normally shows. But when I attempt to jump in, we get the regular cutscene and find that it kills us instantly. So even though it says we should be taking just 122 damage, I have determined that was a lie. Larian, your patch notes are a scam. I tested this a bit further by pushing one of my characters from a height of 51 meters, which dealt 351 damage, so it appears there is not any damage cap on falling in Baldur's Gate 3. But anyways, I got sidetracked, back to the original myth. So with all that information in mind, what are some of the ways that people can actually avoid fall damage in Act 1 when changing elevations? Well, clearly we have featherfall, but there's also fly, landing on webbed surfaces, a monk's slow fall, owlbear's crushing flight, barbarian's eagle dive, and misty step. But those are just the ones I knew off the top of my head, and there could be a few that I missed. Let's first try misty stepping. Surprisingly, it actually lets us cast it into the chasm, but it instantly kills us. The barbarian's eagle leap sadly requires being in combat and a target, making it much harder to test. However, I didn't let that stop me. I timed it on a mid-air target, which took many attempts to even do, but it still didn't work. Then I even managed to get one of my characters into the fall cutscene and attempted to cast it on them, but it still failed. Next, the monk's slow fall was actually impossible to trigger in this scenario, so that one's also out. And although spiderwebs are not realistic at all, I tested them anyways, but they too did not work. The owlbear's crushing flight gives us an instant death with not even showing a cutscene. Odaluke's resilient sphere said that it should block all damage. However, we still die. Okay, maybe death ward? I mean, that should prevent the death afterwards, right? No? That too? Okay, Blood of Lathander? Wait, Blood of Lathander works, but Death Ward doesn't? Okay, I don't get this one. And technically this one doesn't count because we didn't actually survive the fall, but that's kinda cool to know, I guess. Through all this testing, it appears to be a trigger requiring an exact scenario and is not actually fall damage, which is pretty lame, Larian. So by that logic, it seems to require something very specific. So next I changed into a sorcerer, picked up the fly spell, and finally found a spell outside of featherfall that lets me survive. But for some reason, featherfall is the only spell that triggers the exact cutscene here and grants Karlach a bonus 30 experience for doing it. But since the original myth was that only featherfall works, which is what almost every website claimed when I was researching the topic, thanks to Fly, it's safe to say that this one too is busted. I'm pretty sure that I tested all the existing ways to negate fall damage before level 8, but I couldn't actually find any list online of spells that reduce fall damage. If you know of any other spell that may have reduced fall damage here, please let me know in the comments. The next myth being looked at today is that disarmed enemies will re-equip their weapons in combat. This is one that I've seen mentioned in quite a few YouTube guides. The guides normally mention that you have to rush to get a weapon that you've disarmed from your enemy so that they do not re-equip it in combat. However, in my hundreds of hours of Baldur's Gate 3, I can't recall ever seeing an NPC even re-equip their disarmed weapons. So is this even possible? So to start with, I disarmed a few NPCs that were standing around using the command spell, and shockingly, they don't seem to get mad at you for doing this, which is kinda weird. So then I watched and waited for a few minutes as none of them would re-equip their weapons. Then I engaged in combat and they would still not re-equip the weapons. So next I tried disarming them in the middle of the fight to see if that would make any difference. And for the full duration of the fight, they would still not re-equip their weapons. So next I let my character die in the battle and observed as they actually walked over to their weapon and re-equipped it after the battle was over, which I didn't really expect. So now that we know that they can re-equip it, can they actually re-equip it in combat? Then I moved to a hard to reach area and destroyed this ladder so that the enemies can't reach me, followed by engaging in combat and disarming this goblin. And when the goblin started his turn, he picked up the sword and re-equipped it, proving that enemies can re-equip a disarmed weapon in combat. So all the YouTube guides that I'd seen were actually correct when they'd said that they're able to do this, but it seems like they won't pick it up again unless they have no other available actions, meaning it's probably not necessary to rush to grab it before they can pick it up again. And with that, this myth is confirmed to be true. The final myth for today's video is that thieves' tools and trap disarm toolkits get consumed when you use them. Well, luckily for me, since I had a save file with about 100 chests in a line, this one was pretty easy for me to test. So I cleared out my inventory so I only had one of each. Then I went to the lockpicked the lock, checked my inventory, and I still had it. Then I repeated the test with the trap disarm kit, and we see that we get to keep those too. So with nearly 500 hours played in this game, somehow I didn't know that. I guess the fact that it pops up and says used made me think that it meant consumed. I'm actually kind of curious to know if I'm the only one who didn't realize that. Anyways, that's all the myth busting that I have for today. If you've learned anything new, be sure to like and subscribe for future content. And if you have any other myths that you'd like tested, be sure to submit those in the comments below. Also, be sure to check out some of my other videos if you're new here. As always, thanks for watching, Proxy out.